Rachel sat by the window, watching the soft morning light fall over the quiet street. The coffee in her hands had gone cold, but she barely noticed. Life had become still, too still, since her husband David left for another business trip. He was good to her, always polite, always dependable, but somewhere along the way their marriage had lost its warmth. They shared the same home but lived in separate worlds. And though Rachel told herself it was normal, deep down she felt the growing emptiness. David had a son from his first marriage, Ethan, when Rachel first met him. He was 19, tall and quiet, with eyes that carried both kindness and distance. He had visited during holidays while studying in another city. Back then, Rachel tried hard to make him comfortable. She cooked his favorite meals, asked about his studies, and treated him as if he were her own. But Ethan always kept a respectful distance, polite but detached. As though unsure what place she truly held in his life, 3 years passed quickly. Rachel turned 40, David got busier, and Ethan graduated from college. When he returned home to live temporarily before finding his own place, Rachel didn't think much of it. She was happy to have someone around the house again. David was always away, and the silence of an empty home could make her feel invisible. Ethan's presence changed that. He brought life back into the house. The sound of footsteps, quiet music from his room, the clinking of dishes when he helped clean up. At first, things were simple. Rachel treated him like a guest. She cooked dinner for both of them, asked about his job search, and offered motherly advice. But something subtle began to shift, not in what was said, but in how it felt. It started one late evening after dinner. David had just left on another week-long trip. The house was quiet except for the rain outside. Rachel sat in the kitchen reading while Ethan made coffee. When he handed her a cup, their fingers brushed a small, harmless thing, but she noticed how her heart skipped. He smiled a little awkwardly, and for the first time, she saw warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before. They sat together talking about small things, his plans, her work, the city, movies, and how fast life moved. Then Ethan said softly, "You're easy to talk to. I can never talk like this with my dad." His tone was honest, not flirtatious. Still, it touched something deep inside her, a quiet longing to be seen, to be heard. She had been so used to quiet meals, short conversations, and the sound of a phone ringing more than her husband's voice. Rachel tried to keep her tone light. "Your father's just busy. You know how he is," Ethan nodded. "Yeah, but sometimes it feels like I barely know him anymore." That night, after he went upstairs, Rachel sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, thinking about what he'd said. His words reminded her of herself, how she too felt unseen, like she was living next to someone instead of with them. She brushed the thought away, telling herself she was being silly. But the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, Rachel and Ethan grew closer in quiet ways. He'd help her fix the old porch light or carry groceries from the car. They'd talk while cooking dinner or sit together after meals when the house was too silent. It felt comforting, natural even. But sometimes, when she caught him watching her with that calm, thoughtful gaze, she felt a flicker of something she didn't want to name. One Saturday morning, Rachel was watering the small garden in the backyard when Ethan stepped out with 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one and smiled. "You've kept this garden alive better than Dad keeps his plants in the office." She laughed. "Well, plants need attention. Maybe he should try talking to them instead of spreadsheets." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "You make this place feel like home." The words hung in the air. Rachel felt her chest tighten. No one had said that to her in years. She smiled but looked away, focusing on the flowers as if they suddenly needed all her attention. That evening, she found herself replaying his words. "You make this place feel like home." It wasn't romantic, not directly, but it carried warmth, affection, a kind of appreciation she hadn't heard in so long. And that was what frightened her. The next day, when David called, Rachel tried to sound cheerful. She told him everything was fine, that Ethan was doing well, that the house was quiet. But deep down, she couldn't ignore the strange pull between comfort and confusion she felt whenever Ethan was around. One night, after dinner, They watched a movie together in the living room. The lights were dim, and the soft sound of rain came from outside again, just like that first evening. The movie was forgettable, but the silence between them was not. Halfway through, Ethan turned slightly toward her. "You know," he said quietly, "you've done a lot for Dad. He's lucky." Rachel smiled faintly. "I don't know about that. Sometimes I think I'm just keeping things together while he's gone." Ethan hesitated, his voice lower now. "He doesn't see how much you do." "But I do." Rachel felt her heart beat faster. She wanted to thank him, to say something, anything, but no words came. Instead, she nodded and turned back to the screen, pretending to be absorbed in the story. But she wasn't watching. Her mind was spinning. Lying in bed, Rachel couldn't sleep. The sound of the rain seemed to echo her thoughts, steady, restless, unending. She knew nothing inappropriate had happened, but she also knew something had changed. It was like standing near the edge of a cliff, aware of the danger but unable to step back. The next morning, she told herself to focus on work, to stay busy. But when Ethan came into the kitchen, still sleepy, and smiled at her like nothing had happened, she felt her heart soften again. It wasn't passion, it was connection. A quiet bond built on shared loneliness. Rachel realized then how fragile hearts could be. Sometimes love didn't appear in big gestures or loud confessions. Sometimes it crept in quietly, in the space between unspoken words, in the kindness of a glance, or the warmth of someone simply being there when the world felt cold. And though she didn't want to admit it, she felt that her life, once predictable and calm, was about to change in ways she couldn't control. That night, as she stood by the window again, watching the streetlights blur in the rain, Rachel whispered to herself, "Don't cross the line." But her heart, lonely and restless, wasn't sure where that line even was anymore. The morning sun filled the kitchen as Rachel poured coffee into 2 cups. Ethan was already there, sitting at the table with his laptop open. He smiled when she walked in, a quiet, polite smile that warmed the room. Since David had left again for another business trip, the house had begun to feel like theirs. Not in a romantic sense, but in a quiet companionship that both needed. There was laughter in the evenings, shared meals, small talks that stretched longer than either expected. Still, beneath that comfort, something deeper was growing. Something both of them felt but never dared to name. Rachel tried to keep things ordinary. She filled her days with chores, her evenings with reading. But no matter how hard she tried, she found herself noticing the small things, the way Ethan leaned on the kitchen counter when he talked, the calm in his voice, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. She told herself it was only kindness, only gratitude. But her heart knew it wasn't that simple. One evening, they were watching a movie together. It wasn't planned. He had just joined her in the living room after finishing his work. The lights were dim, and the sound of the movie filled the silence. Halfway through, Ethan asked quietly, "Do you ever think life could have gone another way?" Rachel looked at him, unsure what he meant. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, eyes still on the screen. "I don't know. Just maybe you end up somewhere different, meet someone else, and everything changes." There was a strange honesty in his tone. Rachel didn't know how to respond. She sipped her tea slowly and said, "Maybe, but I think we end up where we're meant to be." Ethan turned his head, meeting her eyes. "Do you really believe that?" Her heart skipped a beat. His voice wasn't challenging, it was searching, vulnerable. She smiled softly. "I try to." For a long time, neither spoke. The sound of rain outside filled the space between them again, the same rain that had been there on so many quiet nights before. Rachel could feel her pulse in her chest. She told herself to focus on the movie, but her mind wandered. It was an attraction, not in the usual sense. It was something gentler, sadder. A connection between 2 lonely people who somehow found understanding in each other's silence. Days passed. The feeling didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. They began to share more, not just words, but pieces of their lives. Rachel told him about her childhood. Her dreams of painting before life took her in another direction. Ethan told her about his struggles after college, how lost he felt trying to figure out his future, how he sometimes felt invisible around his father. One night he said quietly, "You make this house feel alive." Rachel felt her throat tighten. She smiled gently, unsure what to say. "It's just a house, Ethan." He shook his head. "Not when you're here." Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up her teacup. She didn't want to hear that, not because it was wrong, but because it was too honest. It reached a place in her heart that had been quiet for too long. The next day she tried to create distance. She woke earlier, spent most of the day cleaning, and avoided long talks. But when evening came, Ethan noticed. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked softly. Rachel froze for a moment. "No, not at all. I've just been busy." He nodded, but his expression showed he didn't believe her. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Later that night, Rachel stood by the window again, staring at the city lights. She felt torn guilty for feeling anything at all, yet unable to deny the warmth Ethan brought into her life. For years, she had been the quiet wife, the caretaker, the steady presence in a house that rarely gave back love. And now, here was someone who noticed her, listened to her, valued her presence, someone who made her feel alive again. A few nights later, they found themselves sitting together on the porch, watching the stars. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of rain. Ethan broke the silence first. "Can I tell you something without you thinking I'm strange?" Rachel smiled faintly. "That depends on what it is." He hesitated, then said, "You're the only person I can really talk to. I don't know why, but I feel like you understand me better than anyone else ever has." His voice was sincere, not flirtatious, not dramatic, just honest. Rachel looked away, blinking back the wave of emotion that rose unexpectedly. "Ethan," she whispered, "I care about you, but you shouldn't rely on me like that. You're young. You'll meet people your age, people who'll understand you too." He smiled sadly. "Maybe, but right now, you're the one who does." Rachel didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, thick and fragile. She wanted to protect him from confusion and herself from guilt. But deep down, she knew their bond wasn't something either of them had planned. It had simply happened, growing quietly in the spaces left empty by years of neglect and loneliness. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep again. She lay awake listening to the faint creaks of the old house, thinking about everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. She told herself it was only temporary, that once David came home, everything would return to normal. But she wasn't sure she wanted that anymore. The next morning she found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Ethan. "Went for a run. Didn't want to wake you. Thanks for last night." It felt good to talk. It was simple, harmless, yet her hands trembled slightly as she read it. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something close to it, a bond built from shared loneliness. Honesty and understanding, the days ahead felt heavier. Rachel tried to pretend nothing was changing, but her heart knew otherwise. When their eyes met, there was something there, something that both longed and feared the same thing that evening. When Ethan returned from his run, he looked tired but peaceful. They ate dinner quietly, avoiding deep talk. But as he stood to leave, he said softly, "You make things feel less heavy." Rachel didn't look up. She only whispered, "That's what family does." But the word family didn't sound right anymore. It felt forced, like a wall she was trying to rebuild too late. When he went upstairs, Rachel sat at the table long after the dishes were washed. She realized how dangerous unspoken feelings could be. They didn't need to be confessed to exist. They could live quietly, breathing in every shared look, every moment of silence, every act of kindness that meant more than it should. As the clock ticked past midnight, Rachel whispered into the empty room, "Don't let this become something it shouldn't." But even as she said it, she knew the heart rarely listens to reason. And somewhere upstairs, Ethan sat by his window, thinking the same thing, wishing he could stop feeling what he couldn't help but feel. Neither of them knew what would happen next, but they both understood something had changed forever. The days moved slower after that night. The air in the house felt heavy, filled with words left unsaid. Rachel tried to focus on her daily routine, making breakfast, answering work emails, cleaning the living room. But even the simplest tasks carried a strange tension. Every time she heard Ethan's footsteps, her chest tightened. She wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid of herself, afraid of what she was beginning to feel, afraid that her heart was wandering into a place it shouldn't go. David had been gone for 2 weeks. He called every few days, his voice distant and hurried. He talked about meetings, flights, deadlines, never once asking how Rachel was really doing. She always said she was fine, and he believed her. But in truth, she wasn't. She felt unseen, unheard. And that loneliness was what made Ethan's presence so dangerous. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed to understand her silence. He didn't push or question. He just was there helping her fix things around the house, offering quiet company, making the place feel alive again. When she came home from the grocery store, he was in the yard repairing the garden fence. When she dropped her keys one morning, he was already there to pick them up. Those small moments, simple, ordinary, carried a weight neither of them could ignore. One afternoon, it rained hard, trapping them inside. The sky was gray, thunder echoing in the distance. They spent the day cleaning the kitchen together. Rachel tried to keep things light, but when their hands brushed over the same dish, she felt a jolt. She pulled back quickly, pretending it didn't happen. Ethan noticed her reaction, but said nothing. The silence between them grew deeper, almost fragile. Later that evening, they sat on opposite sides of the couch, a movie playing quietly in the background. Neither was watching. The air was thick with unspoken emotion. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "You don't have to pretend around me," he said softly. Rachel turned her head, unsure what he meant. "Pretend what?" He looked at her for a long moment. "That you're happy. That everything's fine." She froze. His words hit harder than she expected. "Ethan," she began, but her voice trailed off. He continued, his tone calm but honest. "I see it in your eyes. You keep everything inside. You take care of everyone, but who takes care of you?" For a moment, Rachel couldn't breathe. No one had ever asked her that before. Not even David. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her emotions steady. "That's just life," she said quietly. "We all have our roles." Ethan shook his head. "Maybe, but sometimes those roles keep us from being real." The room fell silent again. The sound of rain filled the space between them, soft and steady. Rachel looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see a boy or her husband's son. She saw someone who truly saw her. Not the wife, not the caretaker, but the person beneath all that. And that scared her more than anything. She stood up, needing space. "I think I'll go to bed," she said, her voice trembling slightly. But as she turned, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Rachel." She froze. When she looked back, he was standing, his expression filled with conflict. "I know this is wrong," he said quietly, "but I can't pretend I don't care about you. You've been there for me when no one else was. You listen. You understand? You make me feel like I matter." His honesty broke something inside her. Tears welled in her eyes, not from romance, but from the ache of being seen after years of feeling invisible. "Ethan," she whispered, shaking her head, "you can't say things like that. You don't understand what it means." He stepped closer, his voice steady but soft. "I do, and I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know." For a long, trembling moment, they stood there, two people caught between right and wrong, between loneliness and longing. Rachel wanted to step back to end this before it went too far, but her heart refused to move. Finally, she whispered, "This isn't right. Ethan, you need to forget what you're feeling." He nodded slowly, eyes full of quiet pain. "I know, but feelings don't disappear just because they're inconvenient." That truth lingered in the air like smoke. She wanted to say more, to offer comfort, to fix what had already gone too far, but no words came. Ethan turned and walked away, heading upstairs without another word. Rachel stood alone in the living room, her heart pounding, her hands trembling. When she finally sat down, she felt the tears she had been holding back finally fall. The next morning was quiet. Ethan left early, saying he was meeting friends. Rachel stayed home, cleaning the same counter 3 times just to keep her mind busy. When he came back in the evening, he acted normal, polite, calm, but she saw the distance in his eyes. The house that once felt alive now felt cold again. As if they were both afraid to breathe too loudly. Over the next few days, they barely spoke. When they did, their words were short, practical. Rachel missed their conversations, but knew it was better this way. What had grown between them wasn't something that could last. It had to fade, even if it hurt. One evening, Rachel found him sitting outside on the porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted orange and pink, the air still after the storm. She joined him quietly. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ethan said, "I'm sorry for what I said." Rachel shook her head. "Don't be sorry for being honest." He turned to her, his expression sad. "But it made things hard for you," she sighed. "Life was already hard, Ethan. We just reminded each other of what was missing." He nodded slowly, looking down at his hands. "I don't regret it," he said softly. Rachel smiled faintly, though her heart ached. "Neither do I." They sat there until the sky turned dark, saying nothing more. And though the distance between them felt heavy, it was also necessary. They both knew that some connections weren't meant to be kept. They were meant to be remembered quietly, like a secret that never left the heart. That night, Rachel stood at her bedroom door, listening to the soft creak of the floor above. She knew Ethan was awake, just as she was. Both of them trapped in their thoughts, wishing things had been different. Wishing they had never crossed that fragile line between comfort and confusion. As she lay down, she whispered into the dark, "Please, let this end here." But even as she closed her eyes, she knew that some feelings, once awakened, never truly go away. They just learn to hide, waiting quietly in the corners of the heart. The house felt quieter after that night, not peaceful, but empty. The kind of silence that carried a weight. Rachel tried to convince herself that things had gone back to normal. She cooked, cleaned, and went to work as usual. Ethan stayed busy too. He had found a temporary job in the city and was gone most of the day. They spoke politely, shared short conversations at breakfast, but the warmth that once filled the house had faded. What had once been comfort was now a reminder of everything that could never be. David returned home after 3 long weeks. His usual cheerful mood filled the house for a while, but to Rachel, it all felt different. He was kind as always, but his attention was elsewhere, his phone, his meetings, his next trip. She smiled, cooked his favorite meal, and listened to him talk about business. But deep down, she felt like a guest in her own home. The connection between them was still broken, though neither wanted to admit it. Ethan stayed quiet around his father, keeping conversations short. He avoided looking at Rachel for too long, and she did the same. There was no anger, only sadness, the kind that came from understanding that something beautiful had no place in the real world. Every shared glance reminded them of what had almost happened, and of the invisible line they could never cross again. One morning, Rachel was folding laundry when she heard a soft knock on her door. Ethan stood there, his hands in his pockets. "Hey," he said gently, "can we talk?" Rachel nodded, trying to hide the nervous flutter in her chest. They stepped outside into the garden, where the spring air carried the faint scent of new flowers. Ethan looked down at the ground for a moment before speaking. "I got an apartment in the city," he said. "A friend from college found a place and asked if I wanted to move in." Rachel's hands froze. "That's good," she said softly. "You should. It'll be good for you." He nodded. "Yeah, I think it's time." They stood there for a moment, both quiet, both pretending it was just another normal goodbye. But it wasn't. They both knew that when he left, it wouldn't just be distance between them. It would be final. "When are you leaving?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning." Rachel forced a smile. "I'll help you pack," he smiled faintly. "You don't have to. I want to," she said. Her voice was steady, but her heart felt heavy. That evening, while David sat in his office on a call, Rachel helped Ethan gather his things. The process was quiet. They worked side by side, folding clothes, stacking books, packing small boxes. Every now and then their hands brushed, and each time they both froze slightly, not out of guilt, but because every touch felt like a goodbye they weren't ready for when they were done. Ethan leaned against the wall, looking around the room that had been his for so long. "It's strange," he said softly. "This place was supposed to just be temporary, but it feels harder to leave than I thought." Rachel smiled sadly. "That's what happens when a place becomes more than just walls." He looked at her, and for a moment, their eyes met, filled with everything they couldn't say. That night, Rachel couldn't sleep. She walked to the living room and stood by the window, watching the faint glow of the streetlights. The world outside looked peaceful, but inside her heart a storm still lingered. She thought about everything, the nights of quiet talks, the laughter, the moment they almost lost control. And how they had both chosen to stop before it went too far. It wasn't weakness. It was love in its most painful form, the kind that knows when to let go. In the early morning, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Ethan, already dressed, carrying his last bag. His car keys hung loosely in his hand. "You're leaving early," she said, trying to sound calm. He nodded. Didn't want to make it harder. Rachel nodded too, though her eyes were already misty. "Drive safe," she whispered. Safa Ethan hesitated, then set his bag down. "Rachel, before I go, I just want to say thank you. For everything. For being there when I needed someone." She smiled, though tears blurred her vision. "You don't have to thank me. You gave me something too." He looked at her curiously. "What's that?" "Reminding me that I'm still alive." For a moment, neither moved. The morning light poured through the window, soft and golden. Then Ethan took a slow step forward. He didn't hug her, didn't touch her, just looked at her with quiet affection and pain mixed together. "I'll always care about you," he said. Rachel's voice trembled. "I know, and I'll always wish you the best." He nodded, smiled faintly, then picked up his bag and walked to the door. She followed him to the driveway, the cold morning air wrapping around them. He opened the car door, paused, and looked at her one last time. "You were the first person who ever really saw me," he said softly. Rachel's throat tightened. "Go live your life, Ethan. Be happy. That's all I want." He gave a small nod, then got into the car. The engine started, the sound echoing softly in the stillness. As the car pulled away, Rachel stood on the porch, arms crossed against the chill, watching until he was gone. When she finally went back inside, the house felt larger, emptier, but lighter somehow. She walked into the kitchen, saw the empty coffee cup he'd left behind, and smiled through her tears. It was strange how something so small could hold so much memory. David came downstairs an hour later, briefcase in hand. "Ethan already gone?" he asked casually. "Yes," Rachel said quietly. "He left early." David kissed her cheek, barely noticing her distant tone. "He'll be fine. He's a good kid." Rachel nodded, forcing a smile. "He is." When the door closed behind him, Rachel sat by the window once more. The sunlight touched her face as she whispered, "Sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go before it breaks you." Her eyes glistened, but she felt peaceful. What had happened wasn't wrong. It was human. Two lonely hearts had found comfort for a moment, then chosen strength over desire. That choice, though painful, was what made it love, not weakness. Weeks passed and life moved forward. Rachel and David continued their quiet routines. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in years. The colors helped her heal shades of blue and gold that reminded her of all the emotions she couldn't put into words every now and then. When the evening light hit the living room just right, she thought of Ethan, of his calm voice, his kind eyes, and the way he had made her feel seen. But she didn't dwell on the sadness. Instead, she smiled. Knowing some stories weren't meant to be lived forever, only remembered gently, and as she stood by the window one last time, watching the world outside her home, she whispered softly, "Thank you, Ethan, for reminding me what my heart could still feel." Then she turned away from the window, ready to begin again.